Good morning, fourth graders. Today in math, we're going to review equivalent fractions. If you remember from last week, we briefly touched upon equivalent fractions, and we talked about this word equivalent and how it sounds a lot like the word equal. The example that I gave you last week had to do with a pizza. If I had a pizza and it was cut into two equal halves, ate half of it and I was left with half, I would write that fraction as 1/2. But what if that same pizza, instead of being cut into two halves, was cut into 4 equal pieces? If I still ate half of the pizza, how much of the pizza would I be left with? Well, you could say 1/2, that's still the same amount of pizza that's left, or you could say 2 out of 4, or 2/4. So the fraction 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent because they represent the same amount. And you can keep going with multiple different examples. If I had a pizza, instead of being cut into two pieces or 4 pieces, if my pizza was cut into 6 pieces. If I ate half of those pieces, I would be left with 3/6 of a pizza, which is still 1/2. Or if my pizza had been cut into 8 pieces, I ate half of this pizza, I would be left with 4/8. All of the fractions that you can see on my page, 1/2, 2/4, 3/6, and 4/8, are all equivalent fractions. If you look at the drawings, each drawing, half of my circle is shaded in, half of my pizza is left. They're just cut into different amounts of slices, and that's what my equivalent fraction means. Today in math, what you're going to be working on are finding equivalent fractions and finding missing parts of equivalent fractions. In order to find an equivalent fraction, all that you need to do is take your original fraction, so for example 1/2, and you need to multiply your numerator and your denominator by the same number, and it can be any number. If you remember, we had said last week that there are an infinite number of equivalent fractions for something like 1/2. I could go on and on and on finding infinite equivalent fractions. All you need to do is multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. For example, 5. Five-tenths is another equivalent fraction to 1/2. You can go the opposite direction as well. Let's say I had the fraction 10/20. Instead of multiplying the top and the bottom by the same number, I could also divide the top and the bottom by the same number. In order to find equivalent fractions, all you need to do is multiply or divide the top and bottom by the same number. When you do this, all that you're really doing is you're taking, for example, your pizza, and instead of cutting it into 2 equal pieces, you're now just cutting it into 10 equal pieces. And you're still left with the same amount, but it's just smaller pieces than you originally had. Let's go over some of the examples on in today's Seesaw assignment so that you can try these on your own. Today in Seesaw, you have 2 assignments to work on where you need to be finding equivalent fractions. This first page, I would recommend using the same strategy that I had just showed you by multiplying the top number and the bottom number by the same number in order to find an equivalent fraction. I'll give you a couple of examples and then you can pause the video and try the rest on your own. For the first problem, you could begin by multiplying your numerator and your denominator by 2. If I multiply my numerator times 2, I get 1 times 2 equals 2. And if I multiply my denominator by 2, 3 times 2 equals 6. So an equivalent fraction to 1/3 is 2/6. Remember, you could have come up with a very different fraction just by multiplying by a different number. If you didn't get 2/6, that doesn't mean your answer is wrong. You just might have a different equivalent fraction, and that is okay. Let me give you one more example before I have you pause the video. I'm going to skip down to this problem down here, 8/10. On this problem, instead of multiplying to make my equivalent fraction larger, I think instead I'm going to divide to make my equivalent fraction smaller. So here, instead of multiplying, I'm going to be dividing by 2. So 8 divided by 2 equals 4, and 10 divided by 2 equals 5. So the equivalent fraction I found for 8/10 was 4/5. Go ahead, pause the video now and try the rest of this page on your own. Come on back and I'll show you a few possible answers that you might have been able to find. All right, to solve these problems, I'm going to multiply most of my fractions by the number 2 because that's pretty friendly and then my numbers don't get too crazy or out of control. But remember, you could have multiplied by something different and gotten a different answer than I did. For this problem, 1/4, if I multiplied the numerator and denominator by 2, I would have gotten 2/8. For 2/5, if I had multiplied the top and the bottom by 2, I would have gotten 4/10. For 5/6, I think I want to multiply the top and bottom by 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 6 times 3 is 18. For 3/8, if I multiplied the top and bottom by 2, I would have gotten 6/16. For 5/8, if I multiplied the top and bottom by 2, I would have gotten 10/16. For 3/10, I think I want to multiply by 3, so I'd get 9/30. And last but not least, for 1/12, if I multiplied my top and bottom by 2, I would get 2/24. Remember, there are multiple possible correct answers, so just in case you didn't get the same numbers I did, that's totally fine. I'll go through and I'll check your work on Seesaw. Let's take a look at the next page. On the next page, you needed to find the missing number. So for example, number 1, you needed to find an equivalent fraction to 3/4 where your numerator was 9. In order to figure that out, I'm going to ask myself, what did they multiply 3 by to get to 9? Well, I know 3 times 3 equals 9. So that must have been the rule that they followed and that they used to find an equivalent fraction. So all I need to do is whatever they multiplied the top by, I need to multiply the bottom by. 4 times 3 is 12. So the correct answer must be 12. Pause the video now, try the rest of these problems on your own, and then you can come back and check your answers. We'll go over them together. All right, question number 2. I'm looking at the fraction 2/4, and I needed to find an equivalent fraction that had a denominator of 12. So I'm asking myself, 4 times what equals 12? I know 4 times 3 equals 12. So that must have been the rule that they followed. Whatever they did to the bottom, I need to do to the top. So if I multiplied the bottom by 3, I need to multiply the top by 3. 2 times 3, I know equals 6, so that is going to be my answer. The next question asks for 3 fractions that are equivalent to 1/4. I think I'll begin by multiplying 1/4 by 2. Instead of multiplying my 1/4 by 2, I think I want to multiply 1/4 by 3. One times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12. And last but not least, I think I want to multiply 1/4 by 4. 1 times 4 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Those were just 3 of the answers that I got. Yours might have been different depending on what you multiplied by. Number 4, I need 3 fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. Let's do 50 over 100. So I know that's 1/2. I'll also do 8 over 16. That's 1/2. And I'll do 20 over 40. Also 1/2. Again, your answers might have been different. The next question wants me to model 2 fractions that are equivalent to 1/3. So to begin, I'm going to break both of these fraction models into thirds. And then, let's see, I'll have my top one broken into 6ths, and my bottom one, I'll break it into 9ths. So 1/3 would be that much. which would be 2/6, or 3/9. Question 6 asks to model two fractions that are equivalent to 3/4. So I know 3/4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. My first circle, I think I'll break it into 1/8. My second circle, I'll break it into 12ths. So that is 6/8, and that is 9/12. And number 7, explain how the two fractions are equivalent. 3/5 and 3 times 6 over 5 times 6. I know that those are equivalent because I multiplied the numerator and the denominator by the same number. My explanation that I wrote for this problem was these fractions are equivalent because the numerator and the denominator were both multiplied by the same number. This is like cutting a pan of brownies into 30 equal pieces instead of 5 equal pieces. 18/30 is the same as 3/5. As always, if you have any questions about today's work, feel free to reach out and ask, and I will see you again tomorrow. Have a great day.